Hi guys, it's Blackie. Okay, as many of you know, and I've done quite a few videos on pocket knives and things like that, I grew up in a generation that used pocket knives a lot, and I'm never without a pocket knife. Most time it's going to be a Swiss Army knife. Fieldmaster is my #1 choice that I carry these days, but that's not really the only choice. Often I'll slip another knife into my pocket just to carry it and enjoy it and etc. So it can be any variety. And since I come up old school, there was a lot of the early slip joints that we used. And I had a young man recently went through my video collection of my videos and found my pocket knife videos and several other of my pocket knife videos. And this young man named Dustin, he's 14 years old, and he's looking for knives to start collecting and things like that. He doesn't have a lot of money, but he said, I want an actual working field knife, something I can actually use that I don't have to worry about, you know. And then, you know, instead of buying one $100 and something case pocket knife, which are great pocket knives, don't get me wrong, but they're really more in the collector realm than the using realm in that, especially for a 14-year-old. I said, well, one of the knives that I collected when I was younger that's still available and is still cheap and was a good knife was the Sabre of Japan knife kind. Now, I'm about to show you the knives in a minute, but let me give you a little background. At the end of World War II, there were a lot of countries that were devastated by that war, and they were trying to get their economies going again. And you had this industry sitting here that they may have made some sort of military whatever. Well, they can't make that anymore. And so as part of the Foreign Aid Office, they would be given package deals, you know, of things that you have the ability to do because of the tools and equipment that you already have. So let's say that this particular division was making some sort of bayonets, let's say. Well, then you already have most of the tooling and stuff. We just need the dies and stuff to actually make pocket knives, let's say. And so a lot of these American companies and many of the European companies would create a sort of generic package deal of making, you know, plates, saucers, pots, pans, things like that. And they would create a package of all the molding, all the tooling, all the technical know-how you need so that you could hand it off to this company. And this company could then get going and manufacture this product. And you, the American company, would then pay them for that product, so they had a guaranteed seller, and then you could turn around into the American market or the European market or whatever and put that out. And so when I was a young man in the 1960s, you saw a lot of stuff coming out of Japan, that type of deal. And one of the things was the pocket knives. Now the company called Sabre, S-A-B-R-E, like cavalry saber, they created the knives. And this one is a 3-blade Stockman by Sabre. And I don't know. Hold on a minute, let me get my glass and I'll tell you what the model number is. Okay, now that I got my eyes on, I can tell you that this is a Sabre model 644. Okay, that is a carbon steel blade, 3-blade Stockman. Got the clip point, got a spay type blade, and then it's got a pin blade in it. It was a steel springs on it, nickel steel bolters. Most of them were Darylin. There could also be the famous yellow, which was used as a work knife and things like that. But that is one model. I'll show you others in a minute. Now this was a very popular design of pocket knife in the United States in this time period. A lot of people carried 3-blade Stockman, especially farmers, people that work cattle. There's a reason they called it a Stockman, because a lot of farmers and things use these knives for notching ears and things like that, in lieu of branding cattle, hogs, and stuff in small farm like things where you only got 20 or 30 animals, would have certain notches cut in the ear. So if they jumped the fence and got into your neighbor's herd, you could say, hey, that's one of the Thomases right there, because it's got 2 notches on that ear, and mine is on the left ear and it's a hole. You know, and it was a way of marking your cattle and your pigs and your sheep and things like that without branding them. Now today they have tags, they didn't have it back then. But these Stockman knives were very, very popular with that. And so the Sabre brand is having these created in Japan, and then they're selling them in the American market. And these were cheap, cheap knives. When I was a boy, I can literally remember walking into like a drugstore down on Main Street Enterprise, and they had a card of the Barlow pocket knives, and I've got one of those in here somewhere. This is one of the Barlow pocket knives, 2-blade Barlow clip type pocket knife by them. And you can always tell that these, because they have Barlow stepped in this tin, and it says Barlow, but it's like one side it's right side up and one side it's upside down when you're looking at it. Plastic handles on it. And these were $2.50 a piece on that card. So for a young man wanting a pocket knife to go fishing, I bought a lot of those little knives. And it was a good carbon steel blade. It had a good spring action in it. And by today's standards, it's actually a pretty good knife compared to what we're used to in cheap stainless steel and etc. But these knives can be found quite often on eBay for a couple of bucks each, you know, 10, 12 bucks. All of the knives I'm going to show you, I didn't pay over 20 bucks for any single knife. And the most expensive one was like $19, and I'll show you that in a minute. But they came in several given styles. Okay, so there wasn't a lot of variety, because I'm handing this package deal off to you, the manufacturer, to manufacture these for me, so you guarantee you get a payday. I'll buy all you manufacture of this style, and then I turn around and I market them in the U.S. at a sufficient price where I can make a profit on them. That was part of this thing. That's also why you will find, like I'm talking about Sabre of Japan, you'll also find Sabre of Hong Kong, Sabre of Ireland, Sabre of the USA. Those are actually the worst ones, guys, to be honest. You would think the American product would be better, but they weren't. They were put into some real rough areas in some big cities where they were just trying to generate any kind of jobs in this place, and it just didn't work out. Okay. And so usually of quality, the Japan ones are the best quality in my opinion. But the Ireland, the Hong Kong, the Pakistan, same knife. It's just where it's made, and it'll say on it. You know, the Sabre of Japan are the ones that I like to collect, and I was recommending to the young man to collect them. Now, another design is this one. This is the classic little Boy Scout camping knife, right? It's got the blade, it's got the can opener, it's got this screwdriver bottle opener, and it's got a punching awl on it, and it's got the lanyard loop for hanging on their little belt. You'd hook a little clip on their belt so that the little scouts wouldn't lose it. But this one was a Sabre, and it's a Sabre model. Ooh, I cannot read that. But you'll know when you look at it. But it's a Sabre of Japan. Okay. Again, it's a good carbon steel blade. Holds an edge really well. I mean, you can make a razor out of that thing. So sharp. So far we've looked at the Barlow. We've looked at the 3-blade Stockman. we've looked at the classic Scout knife. Now this one is mine from way back with. This one is a trapper, it was called, and it had two blades in it. It had the clip blade, and you can tell how wore this thing is, how wore out it is, how many years I used this thing as a kid. I have cleaned deer, I have cleaned everything with this very knife. I got this knife when I was 9 years old, and here it is. I'm 60 now, so that's how long I've had this pocket knife, and you can tell how much I've wore that blade off. Now let me give you a comparison. This is another one, the same design, but this is where they've shifted it, where they've taken that package deal. Instead of it being Sabre Japan, this is actually a Colonial, but it's the same knife. It's identical. But you see how much I've wore down that blade over time? And it still holds the razor edge. It's good steel. And that number on that one was a 614, is the two blade trapper. And finally, my latest acquisition, and this is the most expensive of all of them that I've purchased. It was $19. And it's a yellow handle. Now, these kind of handles, for those that don't know, are called Darylin. It's a type of nylon plastic, I believe, that looks kind of like bone. Wears very well, holds up very well, is not terrible slick, and it's textured so when your hand gets slick cleaning something, it doesn't slide out of your hand easy. So that's a good one. But you look at the size difference between that and the fishing knife. A lot of people don't realize how big this knife is. That's because this was a fillet knife. It had a lanyard so you could clip it and wear it around your neck. And so you had a big thin clip point for cleaning fish, for processing, cleaning fish, light filleting of a relatively normal table size fish, not no huge marlin or something. But you could get the job done, it'd just be slow. But they hold a razor edge. These are good carbon steel blades with a good temper on it. And this is a 624 Sabre Japan. And then on the other blade, it's your utility one. You have a bottle opener and you got a fish scaler. Big advantage for throwing in the fishing kit, ain't it? I got something on me, I can scale fish, and it's got a notch in that end for a fish hook degouger. So I could go down in the mouth of a catfish or something and hook the hook and unhook it and bring it out when he swallowed the hook. And if it was a catch and release, I could reach down and rather than killing the poor thing that I didn't want it, I want to turn it back loose, I can remove the hook and turn it loose. That was worth its weight in gold right there. But I got this not long ago to kind of complete my collection. And so from this little collection of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 knives, all good carbon steel blades, all of them. All of them hold an edge really well. Even knowing that these were cheap knives back in the day. And like I've said many times in my videos about the old woodsmen and men like that I knew usually carried 2 pocket knives. There was the real high quality knife. My granddaddy carried a case knife in his left pocket. That thing was a beautiful piece of work. It had bone handles in it, and it rarely ever came out. When that knife came out, it was serious, because it was absolutely honed to a razor. And if you had a fish hook buried in you and you had to somehow cut it out, it would be that knife. That was the razor. The one in the other pocket was like that Barlow or that 3-blade Stockman I just showed you. One of them. Because they were a cheap knife. And if I was doing some sort of job that could damage a knife, I'm going to use that cheap knife. These guys worked with their hands, and these pocket knives were tools that were used daily. Almost every toolbox and these old farm trucks and etc. had 2 or 3 pocket knives that were just wore slam out, where they had to scrape rust off of something, or scrape the insulation off of wires, or clean out battery terminals, or whatever, and they'd roll the edge or whatever. When they had a little bit of time, they'd clean it up, or they'd take a file and knock the rolled edge off of it, and then take a wet rock and put a little bit of it back on a rainy day when they couldn't get in the field or something. And those knives got wore out in a hurry, but they were cheap. That case, that old timer, that Uncle Henry, that Queen steel, that stayed in the left pocket. That was the good knife. My daddy carried a case, I carried a case, and my granddaddy carried a case. And in the other pocket, my daddy carried a cheap one, my granddaddy carried a Sabre, and I carried a Sabre for a long time. Now, I've also mentioned I had a great big old lock back that I got early on that I carried in my back pocket for a long time. And so there was, in the front pocket was a Barlow, and then it became later that 2-blade Stockman, that 2-blade Trapper, and the back was that big lock bag. The lock bag was like we think of our belt knife today. I used it to clean big game, I used it to whittle, I used it to do bushcraft work. That was the heavy duty. It'd be like you think a belt knife. That rode in my back pocket. That little knife that rode in the front pocket was sharper. Now, did I carry my case? To be honest, I didn't. It was a big rite of passage to me when I was 5 years old and I was allowed to have a pocket knife. I was trusted by my family not to hurt anything, and it would be okay. I was mature enough in their mind to carry that pocket knife. And when I lost that pocket knife when I was 8 fishing, I clearly remember the fishing trip. I must have left it laying there. I think I had to cut some fishing line where I had a fish go under a snag and come out with just a wad of fishing line where probably somebody cleaned out a reel and threw it out of the boat. And I had to cut the fish out of all this mess. And I believe I just laid it down on that stump and got up and walked away. And lost that cheap little bitty Barlow. And so I bought a Barlow to replace it, just like the one I just showed you. Later I bought that 2-blade Trapper, and I carried it a long time. And then later, somewhere in high school is when I got my first Swiss Army knife. And so pocket knives have been an integral part of me. So I can tell you from experience, to the young man that was interested in what should he collect, if you're looking for a good steel pocket knife that is not expensive, look at a Sabre of Japan on eBay for a used pocket knife. The models that I showed you is just about it. I think they also have a long, thin, what we used to call a milling knife. And they also had a hook bill, which was a working knife, great for cutting carpet and stuff like that, and other jobs. And they made a belt knife that was called the original Bowie in stainless. It was not worth your time, guys. I had several of them coming up, and they taught me a lot about a Bowie knife, and they taught me a lot about what good steel is and what wasn't. And to me, none of those original Bowies were good steel. They were stainless, and at that time period in history, we didn't understand heat treat real well on stainless. So it was a real hit and miss. Sometimes you got one and man, it held an edge. It had plastic handles on, a cheap little old thin leather sheath. It was really dangerous how thin it was. The first one I had, I bought it at a hardware store for like 15 bucks for a belt knife to clean catfish, and it would dull so fast. It would not hold an edge. The second one I got actually would hold an edge very, very well. Then that got damaged, and then the third one I got to replace it with just a piece of junk, and I moved on to other knives. But if you're looking for a type to collect, that you want a good piece of steel, I'm not just wanting to collect it for something to show to put in the collection. I want a cheap pocket knife like it that's got a good piece of steel in it that I can actually use, like you're talking about carrying it over here, and keep that expensive, you know, deluxe one that I like to carry, that I'm wanting to save it from the rough work. Go get a Sabre of Japan. I think you'll be very pleased with it. Hope this gives you some ideas, guys, and if you've enjoyed the video, please hit that like before you go to feed the algorithm. I'd really appreciate it. Till next time, guys, I'm Blackie, wishing you safe journeys. Have a great day, guys.